Hello, and welcome again to another episode of Naked Nuclear, where we are stripping down energy topics in the nuclear industry. And today is a part of our series on the student spotlights. So we're highlighting students in the industry who are doing really cool and amazing things, but also how they got there. And so today with us, we have Sarah Cole. She's got a BS in material science, and she's an engineering student from Boise State University, an undergraduate researcher. And when I talked to her, I was like, oh man, it would be super cool to do a show. And we're going to kind of break this up into a mini series. First topic that we're going to kind of jump into is just like your background, Sarah. How did you get into this field, material science, and all that?
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Danielle. My name is Sarah Cole. I'm originally from Boise, Idaho, and I got into the nuclear industry in high school when I did an internship at Boise State University. Over the course of that year, I really fell in love with research and looking deeper into materials for extreme environments for nuclear reactor applications. And that motivated me to study material science and keep pursuing my undergraduate research in nuclear fuels over the past 4 years. And now I've decided I love nuclear so much, I want to go get my doctorate in nuclear engineering next year.
Wow, that's you make it sound very easy. You're like, oh, I just was in love with research and I just wanted to go do. So, like when you were in high school and you did this program, like what was that? How did you even find it?
Well, I really looked out because my neighbor is actually a professor at Boise State, my parents' neighbor, that is. And so I didn't necessarily apply so much as I just chatted him up about engineering. And that is how I got the initial internship opportunity. And so it was really just a who you know type situation that's changed my life. But as far as what the experience was like, my senior year in high school was during the COVID year. And so that did bring a really strong benefit in the fact that every other day I was in person in high school versus on Zoom or just not in high school. And so I had a lot more free time than I would have otherwise to spend time on campus at Boise State. But I spent that year under the mentorship of a couple of PhD students working with nuclear sensors. And so I got to do tensile testing of additively manufactured sensors on structural nuclear materials. And once I gained experience assisting with that experimentation and data analysis, they let me run wild with my own little experiment where I tested these sensors in a high humidity chamber and designed the experiment from start to finish. At the end of the year, I presented at an Idaho undergraduate research conference at Boise State as my culminating experience and just really loved the whole process and the people I worked with.
Wow, that is awesome. So yeah, I'm hearing networking, the fact that you were able to do like a mini research project as well. That sounds really cool because I think you probably had a lot of freedom and ability to really create and do something really cool with your research as well. So like growing up, were you interested in sciences or were you always interested in math and science or what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, great question. I always wanted to be a lawyer because in high school, I was a big speech and debate kid. And I also loved math and science. So I kind of had two parallel visions. And ultimately, I went with engineering because I could still channel in that part of my personality that loves to communicate and loves rhetoric, but in a way that's more impactful through nuclear science and technology. And so would have gone on to like something more humanities based if I hadn't got that internship, maybe, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And then through Boise State University, can you talk us a little bit more about your research, how you got into the specific type of research that you're doing, and some of the applications for people who maybe are not familiar?
Sure. My current research at Boise State focuses on nuclear fuels. I work with uranium nitride, which is an advanced technology fuel candidate. Currently, the light water reactor fleet uses uranium dioxide, but there are some challenges associated with UO2, such as lower uranium density and lower thermal conductivity compared to advanced fuel concepts like UN. And so my current research is on synthesizing uranium nitride with traditional synthesis means, as well as conventionally sintering fuel like they would in commercially upscale fuel fabrication facilities. And eventually we want to look more into both its oxidation behavior and thermophysical properties to add to those knowledge gaps before we can fully utilize UN in advanced reactors and the whole civilian nuclear fleet potentially one day. So that's a little bit about the applications of my research.
Awesome. And earlier this year, we had a podcast episode with Dr. Watkins, who's also doing advanced fuel research as well. Do you guys know each other?
Yeah, I used to work in my research lab and I work with a lot of the same materials she did.
Awesome. That's super cool. I mean, I feel like nuclear in and of itself is like a kind of a small industry and a really big industry at the same time, just because I'm making connections with people and I'm like, oh, you know this person who knows that person who knows this person. Has that been your experience as well as an undergrad?
One experience that highlighted that for me was I interned in DC through the American Nuclear Society after my sophomore year. And I was writing a policy analysis where I did interviews with nuclear professionals on the policy side. So in the executive, legislative, NRC type spaces. And I got to meet the people whose faces I've always seen plastered all over the internet for nuclear and LinkedIn, etc. And so now, whenever I see any sort of advancement in, like, oh, the Advance Act got passed, or oh, they're modernizing certain NRC regulations, I see faces that I actually got to meet with in person. And I think it's so cool that nuclear is such a small pond that I've physically like met a lot of these people. And that's one of the things that motivates me to stay in the field.
That's awesome. Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to kind of really touch base on was networking. From your experience, how's it been going so far? Did you just like reach out to people? And what's the atmosphere like as a student who maybe doesn't have as many contacts and know as many people?
For me, at a university that doesn't have a nuclear engineering program, conferences are really big for me because I can travel to, say, the ANS winter meeting and go to the ANS Young Professionals Congress and meet a whole network of students that turn into be my friends and future colleagues. For example, I went to that Young Professionals Congress in DC during my junior year, and I met the current vice chair of the nuclear engineering student delegation, which is a group of students who go back to DC for a week of nuclear policy advocacy and meetings in the nation's capital. And so by meeting her and some of the other delegates, I then went on to join that delegation, and now I'm vice chairing it for the 2025 year. And so for me, going in person to physical conferences has been huge to meet people and learn about new opportunities. But I'll also say the power of LinkedIn has been really beneficial for me because anytime I come across somebody and I read their bio and it looks like they have a cool series of work and research experiences, I always tend to take note of those and maybe just connect with them. And then in the future, potentially meet them in person too. And so that's also been a way for me to just see what opportunities are out there without leaving my room.
Yeah, that's awesome. How do you find out about like the conferences that are going on?
I'm on a lot of email lists through like the American Nuclear Society, or my department at school will send them to me as well. But a lot of the time, I'll just Google things like maybe not for a conference, but rather for a scholarship. I'll Google scholarships for students in nuclear material science, and you'd be surprised what you don't know about that exists. So I wouldn't be afraid to just blindly Google for really tailored, specific things you're interested in.
Yeah, that's awesome because we briefly talked about, for scholarships and how do you get money and things like that. What was your experience? Did you have a strategy or what worked, what didn't work? I just want to know, how do you get into that headspace of finding money within this space?
I started my scholarship journey my senior year in high school, and I had a physical little file cabinet box of scholarships that I found over the summer that I intended to apply for during that school year. So I knew I'd be too busy to actually look them up in the time and the pressure when they're almost due. So I started early, and since then I've ended up getting all of my school paid for, and I've made a considerable amount of money back, which I pay taxes on as if it's just a regular income. My approach for that has just been I do the major ones in the nuclear industry, which would include the American Nuclear Society, the University Nuclear Leadership Program. This year I found out about the Roy G. Post Foundation Scholarship as well. I also have received the Taco Bell Live Moss Scholarship every year, which is it can be up to $25,000, renewable for 4 years. All I did to get that was to make a 2-minute video about my passion. And of course, I talked about nuclear. Every year, I remake the video, and they've gotten more elaborate as time went on. To now, I'm doing fun musical montages of me working in my research lab and showing myself working with radioactive materials in the glove box. And so I kind of have fun with it, and I take advantage and shoot my shot on things that maybe I won't get. And then turns out I did get that Taco Bell one.
That's amazing. An undergrad sponsored by Taco Bell is pretty neat. When you're getting into these scholarships, I think for me, myself, I loathe applications. If I see an application and it's got multiple pages, I'm like, ugh, the worst. So for the essays part, how do you talk about yourself and how should other students talk about their passions in a way that is persuasive?
Great question. I typically start with something to the effect of researching materials for extreme environments. I pick something that's a little more specific than just a blanket statement of nuclear energy. For me, because I'm in materials and nuclear, I'll say like nuclear materials. And then I give a very brief anecdote about how I got into nuclear, which is through my high school internship and how that set me on a path to exploring the industry. And then I will say, like, now I intend to pursue a PhD in nuclear engineering to do X, Y, and Z, and briefly state my career goals. I'll then do a couple of paragraphs about my previous research experiences, tying in, I interned at Stanford doing batteries and my current research at Boise. And then I'll conclude with some very specific career goals. So maybe you could mention, oh, I want to work at Westinghouse in nuclear fuel fabrication. I want to be a professor because I would enjoy mentoring and educating students. And just showing that you have a grasp on what your day-to-day would look like and who you'd be impacting and who you'd be serving in that future job, just to show you the wheels have turned in your brain and you can actually see yourself in those positions. And then I typically end with a final statement that's positive in nature and forward looking, like I'm excited to pursue nuclear engineering research as a UNLP scholar, something like that.
Gotcha. That's a really great framework, I think, as well, because it definitely is overwhelming for students when they're like first getting in to be like, tell me about yourself. And you're like, oh my gosh, no. So I like the way that you have a very like talk about how you got into the industry, what your a very specific focus is, and then going into that future idea of like what do you want to do in the future and why. I think that's super helpful for people to kind of know as well. Do you have any advice on any students who are looking at trying to get letters of recommendation? Like how do you kind of form those connections with professors and just people that you know?
That's a great question. I would say if you can start as early as possible, like if you're a freshman just entering college, get a position in a research group and start building that foundational background so that you have an advocate on your team that's willing to rightly say a lot of great things about your work ethic and your accomplishments. So if you have that capability to start early, I'd say do it. If not, one of the things that can be really effective is giving your recommender a lot of pointers or reminders about what you've actually achieved under their time, because your professors can be busy and they might not be keeping track of every single one of your accomplishments. So if it's somebody who's maybe less familiar with the intimate details of my resume or CV, I'll definitely provide that to them so that maybe if they don't have very specific commentary to make about you due to lack of working with you for a long time, they could still point to, oh, they got this award, or bring to the surface your other accomplishments, not directly affiliated with their mentorship over you. I'd also recommend starting early and giving your recommenders like well over a month to submit these things.
Oh, yeah. So some lead time. I think that's kind of a theme that I've heard you say multiple times is like you're very kind of forward thinking and like, hey, we're going to get these scholarships on the table for maybe this year or next year. And they're going to like make sure that whoever I'm asking for a letter of recommendation has like a month and an outline of like who I am and what I do in order to have like a really strong application. Because I know for a lot of students, it's really like, last minute. I've even gotten some that's like, hey, can you write me a letter of recommendation like right now? Also, it's due tomorrow. Okay, thanks, bye. And I think that's really challenging to be able to do that. So I like the idea of kind of giving, your recommender some reminders of who you are, what you've done, any accomplishments of things like that. For your scholarship that you like all the different ones that you've got, like what's been the impact for you? I mean, scholarships versus no scholarships. Like how has this kind of changed your outset and mindset in school?
The impact's been huge. The most important thing for me, aside from the financial benefit of not having to pay for school, is I'm so much more motivated and like it's kind of a cyclic process where if I get something that's validating my efforts within research and nuclear, it makes me want to do it even more. And definitely I have an intrinsic sense of motivation to do these things because I love nuclear energy and I believe our country needs it. But it also is a big boost to see like, wow, there's great opportunities in this field. Like I've been supported since age 18 by the nuclear industry and by the federal government, by the Office of Department of Energy giving me these scholarships. This seems like a great path to keep walking down. So it's honestly provided me a sense of trust to dedicate my career to it since they've had my back throughout my educational journey. But also, I can't ignore the fact that because of my scholarships, I can afford to go to college and also I don't need to get a second job in addition to my research assistantship position. And that gives me a lot more time to work in the lab and to be able to dedicate time to something that might pay a little bit less.
Yeah, I think that that makes a lot of sense. Kind of what you said about how it kind of creates this feedback loop where you're like, wow, like they've had my back. Of course, I'm going to do this work and get deeper and deeper into the industry, which is such a positive relationship, I think, to me. And yeah, definitely one of the overlying kind of consensus with grad school and undergrad as well is how stressful it can be, both on the academic side and the financial side. So it's really amazing that you've got the financial side very much figured out, so to speak. So, kind of going into that grad school, so you're applying to grad schools right now. Can you walk us through? It seems like you have such a good system for everything. So what has been your method to, finding schools, finding professors, research that you're interested, and how do you reach out to some of these folks?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to stay in the field of nuclear material science since my undergraduate degree is material science focused. And I also think I would have been the best fit in those fields instead of jumping over to something I'm less familiar with. So I looked for programs with strong research within nuclear materials, first and foremost. And then this summer, I reached out to faculty that seemed like they'd be a good fit and had Zoom meetings with them. And I continued to do that throughout the course of applying to these schools and sort of refining as I went along. Or maybe I found a different professor that looks like a good fit even after I submitted my application and just reach out and say, hey, I'm really interested in XYZ research. Most of the time, they were willing to hop on a Zoom call with me that day, the next day. And I just sort of asked them basic questions about the research, their mentorship style, the atmosphere at the university, as kind of a litmus test for if I'd like to go there. Most of the time, I generally really appreciated what they had to say and learned a lot. And then I felt like because I had insight into their personality, I was able to distill down my application essay and tailor it more specifically toward their group or to the culture of the university.
Awesome. That's amazing. And you know, I think the customization part of tailoring applications to maybe not having like a one size fits all approach has been pretty good for you. In terms of that application, has it been stressful? What are you feeling in terms of like applying to grad school?
I think because I've had so much experience writing these types of applications, I don't think I found the preparation of my essay too stressful. But sometimes, hopping on that first Zoom meeting with a big, scary professor is a little bit intimidating. But I think the more I've done those, the more I've grown confident that I can be myself and ask the questions I want to know. So that part was a little bit stressful, but it's gotten better for me over time.
Gotcha. That's awesome. I guess I'm wondering, for students who are maybe in high school or early freshmen, how do they make themselves successful in their time as an undergrad, or if they're looking to go to grad school? Like, what tips would you give to really help somebody out who's like, I don't know how I schedule all these really intense course loads?
Sure. First, I would say take advantage of every summer after my freshman year, sophomore year, and junior year summers, and hopefully this coming summer too. I've lived in Washington, D.C., Stanford, and done cool internships. I even did a batteries research internship that had nothing to do with nuclear, just to see if I liked it and to try something new. And those things have been super enriching to me. And I feel like now I have friendships from people of all backgrounds all over the country. That's been helped me be successful because I have a stronger sense of what I want to do with my life. Like now that I've researched batteries, I know for sure I want to stay in nuclear, and that's something I'm not just going on a whim about. Like I've actually tried a different branch of material science research. So use your summers to your professional and academic and social advantage because it's kind of is a fun life adventure too. Um, my other would be, try and keep your GPA high as best as you can. I think that is probably pretty important, but I don't think you need to have a 4.0. But just like focusing really hard on your classes, even if it means you've got to wake up at 5 a.m. and grind on certain days.
Awesome. Gotcha. Yeah, I think that'll be helpful because I think, sometimes within the sciences, my friend and I were just talking about her engineering experience. And she was like, I was struggling through most of the time. She was talking about how she really reached out to professors, TAs, office hours to get that work done. And she's like, yeah, I'd be at awkward times of day, but that's kind of what we had to do. I would say within kind of like jumping back into that networking, how did you start forming relationships with your professors and with the researchers there at Boise State?
Great question. Well, I had an early introduction to the other researchers just by virtue of having my high school internship. And so I think that because I was an 18-year-old who was kind of friends with all these 26, 27-year-olds, that made me really comfortable forming friendships and relationships with other graduate students and with faculty. Beyond that, in my coursework, I definitely utilized the office hours, and I definitely wasn't afraid to ever pop in and ask a question. So I would just say, like, these people are here to help you and they want to help you. So just pick their brain. Like, you're surrounded by amazing minds as a student. Use that to its full advantage to help you grow as well.
Gotcha. That definitely makes sense. And I think it's really helpful because I think there is a lot of fear and stress and apprehension for students coming into these roles and form a relationship with this adult who is supposed to be teaching you and is like 30 years your senior, and maybe ask them for a letter of recommendation one day. Also, you're 18 and you've never done this before. So I think it's a little bit challenging and super intimidating. One of the things I keep on hearing you say is you're doing it anyway. Even though you might be a little uncomfortable or a little scared, you're still going to do it, which I think is really cool for you. Awesome. So, kind of leaning towards the future, what would you like to do? Like, what kind of extracurriculars do you want to do within the nuclear space? And what do you want to see yourself doing 10 years, 20 years from now within this space?
In grad school, I'm already planning to serve as the vice chair of the nuclear engineering student delegation in Washington, D.C. And so we're already in the works of planning next year's delegation in September. And so that'll look like preparing an application, interviewing a lot of students who are interested in it, and arranging our meetings for our 1 week delegation that we have. So that's kind of my main extracurricular commitment. That's something I'm really passionate about on the side is nuclear policy. So I definitely want to stick with that. After graduate school, I envision myself continuing with research in academia and being a professor. But I also want to do a 1 year fellowship on Capitol Hill, and work, say, in the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and help lawmakers write and decide between policies that support not just nuclear, but other areas of a clean energy legislative portfolio. And I think it'd be a uniquely fun time to do that right after graduate school because, I've just gotten a doctorate degree and I've just kind of like put the check on my future research, and then I can take that experience with me back into teaching to grow as a scientist.
Wow. Okay. Well, first, I think you'd be an amazing professor. So, can you talk a little bit more? So, you're the vice chair. Like,
Um,
what are your roles and responsibilities in that position, and kind of how do you steer the ship? I guess.
yeah, well, we have a chair and two vice chairs that plan the delegation, and we work with the American Nuclear Society and the Nuclear Energy Institute to put on the delegation every year. And so in January, that's when we start planning for the delegation in September. and we have regular Zoom meetings with the other co-chairs, and we plan, like hotel logistics, recruitment at the various conferences coming up. So I'm going to go to the ANS student conference and help promote the delegation. And we blast out the application. We receive a lot of interest in it, and we interview students in May, make selections, and over the course of the summer, continue planning. What day are we going to go to White House Office of Science and Technology Policy? What day are we going to go visit the NRC? And hammer down the logistics so that we're ready to go in September.
Holy smokes. That is so cool to me. I'm like, wow, maybe I should be. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm like, let me put my name in the hat. Amazing. And so, I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, like, how do you do it all? It sounds like you do, so much and are really invested in this field. And I'm just kind of wondering, for students that are kind of trying to still figure out their path and what clicks for them, what are your insights that you've learned about yourself within the nuclear energy field, but just within your academic journey as well?
That's a good question. Insights I've learned about myself are I love to talk. Like I said, I initially wanted to go into law because I was a big debater. That hasn't changed. And being a scientist hasn't changed the fact that I still want to be someone that can communicate effectively and that will love to have conversations, not about nuclear energy sometimes. And so I still like to grow as a conversationalist despite working in a field that could potentially like just get so locked down into the science that they don't like to dabble in those sorts of things. Yeah, that's one realization I guess I've had for myself.
That's awesome. It's funny because my family tells me the same thing. They're like, of course you started a podcast. You love to talk. I'm like, true. But yeah, I think it's great that from the perspective of nuclear energy that we've kind of gotten to this place where we have the science and it's really locked in and we're really innovating, but our communication skills are sometimes a little not great. And so that's something that I'm really fascinated in, is how do we kind of create more scientist communicators to communicate to all levels of the public. I remember you were talking about, you did an initiative with K through 12 and took teachers to INL. What was that about?
I'm the president of our student section at Boise State, and thanks to the American Nuclear Society, we received a local and strategic fund grant in the amount of $4,000. We used that money to take about 30 teachers out to Idaho National Lab, which is 4 hours away from Boise. We got to take all these high school and middle school teachers of all sorts of different science backgrounds, like chemistry, physics. Some of them were teaching technology classes. So kind of the whole the Energy Sciences Lab, which does non-nuclear clean energy research. So they saw some recycling and agricultural research as well as electric vehicles there. That was in the in-town facilities. And then INL bussed them out to the desert and they got to see first the experimental breeder reactor 1, and that's now a museum where they got to see the first, it's a nuclear power station that powered Arco, Idaho as the country's first powering of a city with nuclear energy. And then also we went to the Advanced Test Reactor, which is a test reactor that does a lot of work for naval nuclear reactors and other companies and universities that want to test certain fuels and materials concepts in a test reactor. And that was just a really fascinating experience for a lot of the teachers because they actually got to see a real life nuclear reactor. They got to see the cooling pools and lean their head over and see the blue glow Cherenkov radiation. So it was a lot of like real in-person experiences. I hope these teachers will never forget, and also that they could take back to their kids and tell them stories about nuclear and get them really ramped up to get their elementary school kids to maybe consider career in science one day.
Wow, that's super amazing. It's super cool. I think one of the things that I used to also be a science educator within second through eighth grade, and getting kids of that age interested in science and all the different parts of it. It definitely ignites a spark in them at that age that they can see themselves doing it. So that's an amazing initiative as well. I'm so proud of you. Just like being able to be so impactful in a lot of these different spaces within nuclear energy. And it's really cool to hear all the different things that you've done up until this point and probably all the things that you're continuing doing. Just lastly, for grad schools, what schools have you applied to so far?
Oh, sure. I applied to 6 schools, North Carolina State, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, MIT, UC Berkeley, University of Florida, and University of Michigan.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Any last like pieces of advice for students or even people who are like maybe considering applying to graduate school? What kind of insight would you like maybe give them?
Don't be afraid to say you see there's a conference that you could go to, like the AMS Young Professionals Congress they hold every other year in DC. If that sounds like something that's exciting to you, I would say lean on your university to support you in going and traveling to these things and paying for you to do so. I wouldn't be scared to ask for other support, see this amazing opportunity and do networking. For students going into graduate school, my biggest advice would be make sure you're holding meetings with potential research advisors in advance of actually applying to the school because I think you'll gain a lot of insight, and it could potentially save you an application fee if you realize you don't want to go there, quite honestly. Or it can, I think, just elevate you in the application review if you've already made contact with that individual. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for kind of hopping on this call today and sharing so much of your insight and wisdom within your academic experience. I think it'll help a lot of different students that maybe just need a little advice or a little clarity to be like, what should I be doing? Or how should I be doing it? Or what am I going to apply to? I think it's always so helpful of, the power of like a suggestion. And so for you, you've got so many of these really insightful suggestions that have obviously worked in your favor. I'm really hoping this episode and these mini series help so many other students get a little more clarity of how they should be applying to schools, how they should be networking, how they should get scholarships, because all of those things are super important in this kind of grand scheme of education and especially higher education. So thank you so much for being able to take the time and chat with us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.